He talked about it very passively. Well, somehow we ended up in this position where we don't have any assets. You built this roster, dude.
Yeah, I thought some of his comments were shocking to hear, trying to move Zeke and Dario. And the Strawler comment as well.
It was very like we're all trying to find the guy that did this meme. The guy in the hot dog suit.
I've been stressing all year. I think Malone has done a good job of experimenting a lot with his lineups and pushing the bounds of the roster. I've liked Russ in that role at times, and I think it's curious because Malone hasn't gone back to that lineup at all. Like, I would like to see Russ at the 2 next to Jamal with MPJ and Jokic at the 4-5. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now, teams have been game planning for Russ in the Jokic pick and roll, game planning for the past. They don't think Russ is going to be able to score at the rim.
He's been doing an admirable job filling in for Peyton Watson. Some of the stuff shocks me. You put Zeke with Jokic, you get a 130 offensive rating. Jokic is the best player in the world. I don't know what else to tell you. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with our guest. At this point, you've got to be the best friend of the pod, CT. How are you doing today?
Hey, Grace and Will, how you guys doing? Thanks for the kind introduction. Appreciate it. You guys doing a great job with the podcast. So happy to be back and talking Nuggets and NBA with you guys.
This segment is about the roster, obviously, because they didn't do anything at the trade deadline. They literally zero. Last year, at least they traded Kamagate's draft rights for cash. I think was the one move they did. But the first thing I want to talk about is backup center. After the trade deadline on whatever day that was, Calvin Booth decided to do an impromptu press conference before the Nuggets played, I think it was the Orlando Magic at home, actually. And he actually revealed a couple of things to us about the front office's approach to the trade deadline. One is they were not planning on shaking up or adding anything to the main rotation, well, according to Calvin, but were instead shopping guys like Dario and Zeke and those end of bench guys to try to upgrade the backup big position, backup center in particular. DeAndre Jordan was, quote, long in the tooth. These are Calvin's words, not mine. And they tried to go after Valanciunas, but Sacramento was able to beat their offer just because of the assets that they had at their disposal, or lack of assets that they had at their disposal. The Nuggets did. Calvin kind of made a whole show of the fact that the last couple of years they were kind of constantly like going to the bank, I guess, to acquire credit in the form of like current draft picks and trading future draft picks. But now the bill has come due and they don't really have the assets to make moves, or at least beat other teams' offers to make those moves. I found that interesting because he talked about it very passively, and it was kind of like, well, somehow we ended up in this position where we don't have any assets. It was very like we're all trying to find the guy that did this meme, the guy in the hot dog suit. But when it comes to the backup center search in particular, how did you feel about them saying that they were trying to prioritize finding a backup center specifically for the regular season? That's basically what Calvin said, instead of another position that's more likely to play big minutes in the playoffs, especially because in that same press conference, Calvin said, ooh, I'm not sure Julian's going to be able to make it defensively in the playoffs, but he's one of our top 8 right now.
Right. Yeah, I thought some of his comments were shocking to hear. Like trying to move Zeke and Dario, and the Strawler comment as well. I mean, it's true.
Just don't usually expect to hear it from the GM that drafted him and presumably didn't re-sign a guy like Justin Holiday so that Julian would get more minutes this year, etc.
Right. And I think, with the backup center slot, I mean, DeAndre has played as well as anyone could have hoped this year.
Yeah.
And his skill set is valuable, especially playing beside, you can play beside Mike, you can play him beside AG, even, playing beside your favorite player, Zeke Naji. Some combinations have been more versatile than others. If they could have gotten at least, DeAndre's at the tail end of his career. So trying to get any other center that is a, rim roller, has some gravity, could block shots and rebound would be beneficial to the team in the regular season and the playoffs. Because I think Jamal plays better with those kind of guys off the bench, especially I think at this juncture where you kind of need that
Yeah.
gravity. So
I don't know who would have been like actually available besides like Robert Williams III. I'm surprised Portland didn't move him at the deadline unless they were adamant about getting a first round pick, which I don't think anybody was willing to do because of the injury history and the injury current. Frankly, he's barely played this season as well. But other than him, Nick Claxton, who's, making $25 million a year, there really aren't like that's a pretty rare archetype, at least in like a good player. I guess Day'Ron Sharp is another one, although his rim finishing has been an issue this year, and he also has an injury history. But it's funny because the basic pick and roll big who can, catch lobs and protect the rim some. You'd think that it'd be a more common archetype, but there aren't actually that many that are, well, actually good. Dallas has 3 of them now. Which is hilarious. They basically have like Pokemon evolutions of rim rollers from Daniel Gafford to Derek Lively to Anthony Davis. Another thing that Calvin said during his press conference related to that backup center position is something that he's, quote, known for a while is that Zeke is a 4. Now, at the time that Calvin did this press conference, at the trade deadline, I think Zeke had played a couple of games filling in for Peyton Watson, who had gotten injured. I think it was during the Knicks game. It was either the Knicks game or the Bulls game. Injured his knee and he's still out right now. What was your reaction to that comment about Zeke being a power forward, which seemed to be directed at Malone and the coaching staff's use of Zeke when the front office are the ones who were responsible for signing Zeke to his extension the same year that the only backup center that was on the roster was DJ?
yeah, I think definitely surprising to hear that. I think for with Najee, I think a lot of the context that fans are missing when it comes to the Najee discussion is that he had to move to the 5 because his jump shot abandoned him.
Yeah,
That's
that's enough.
why he to the 5. He was a good shooter coming into the league as far as his first year. I mean, not coming out of Arizona. That first year, that second year, I think he shot like 30s, like something or above percent from 3. Like he's pretty good. It wasn't like a huge amount of volume or
Right, very low volume.
right, but his jump shot looked really good mechanically, and he was moving more.
Well, hang on. No, it didn't. He
I,
had possibly
not
one
to
of the
the.
jankiest mechanics in the league at that point,
It was
but it
going
was going in.
right. It was going.
Okay. I just want to clarify that.
It wasn't a nice jump shot, but yeah. So that's why he moved more toward the 4. Coming out in Arizona, he was when I was scouting him, he was a 5. He was playing the 5 at Arizona as a rim roller, a lob threat. He had a mid range jump shot, but he was not shooting threes. He was not shooting pick and pops. He was not attacking bigs off the dribble or attacking closeouts. And again, the staff made him bulk up, and he moved on to the 5. And again, that year where he was the championship year, he played pretty well next to Vlaco in the front court, and even beside Jeff, like he played decently at the 5. Then it was the year after, which I think was a lot of the context with who he was playing with, as why it didn't end well that year, last year. But also too, Zeke was not playing at a level that was rotation caliber for a contender. So I think that's partially some of the context for it. I think that's where fans are kind of missing missing that part of the discussion. But he's looked much better at the 4 as of late. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, you have to give him credit.
He's finishing stuff at the rim, which every time it happens, I'm like, it's not pretty. He has been, I think he's shooting like 56% on twos basically since he got moved to the 4, which, is big. And he's been shooting slightly above league average on a low volume of 3-point shots as well. The misses are also very ugly. So it's not like we're saying he's a shooter, but he's
Right.
been playing better. The thing is like those things on offense are really important for him. Like just being able to finish at the rim is big because he's going to be getting dump off passes and whatnot to. And I'm always scared when he does, especially in even a slightly crowded paint. But to his credit, he's been able to, finish those things lately, which allows him to stay on the floor and do what he does defensively. And he's been, I think, doing an admirable job filling in for Peyton Watson, who is the only other like big-ish defensive wing that we have on the roster. So we really needed Zeke to play and fill in that role, and he's done a really good job to this point. I didn't really understand those comments. In particular, the I've something I've known for a while. So I'm like, you built this roster, dude. Like, but continuing on the conversation of backup center, the AG at center looks are something that Malone has gone to in the playoffs for the last 2 years. To varying degrees of success. They were very successful in 2023. They were very successful last season, even up until I keep going back to this. The non-Jokic minutes were very good in the Wolves series until Chris Finch started mirroring Rudy's minutes with AG, that's just a tough matchup, right? And Rudy's a really good player, and he makes the other players on that team better. So that was just tough after game 5 in that series. But it was something that they could go to in the playoffs to spell Jokic. This season, they've gone to the AG at center looks pretty sparingly, understandably, because AG has been coming back from calf injury, and he also hasn't looked quite like himself. He's starting to get better, but it's been a very gradual, journey in that sense, trying to get him back into tip-top shape. But we have a limited sample of AG at center, about 150 possessions. When AG's on the floor without Jokic, Dario, or DJ, it's a minus 14.4 net, which is really bad. That's like what you'd expect in non-Jokic minutes in the past. And, not that non-Jokic minutes have been amazing this season, but they have been a little bit better this year with DJ on the floor. They've been only minus 4.7 net when it's AG at center without Zeke there. So that's like AG and Zeke both being there kind of muddles the data a little bit. So you're like, I don't know who's playing center. I don't know if it matters for how we're looking at the data. But the point is here, has the AG at center look gotten stale, and will the front office basically regret not getting a real backup big that actually possibly would have been needed in the playoffs?
I'd say maybe, or I'd say not determined at the moment.
Do you think it's just sample size?
I do. I think it's a little bit sample size, and I also think that AG played hurt a bit when he was playing those.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we're seeing the full scope that AG's defense, I think, this year has slipped a bit. And I
Yeah.
think that's due to the health. You haven't been able to switch him 5 out really a lot of the time. Anytime he's been on a guard, for the most part, I think he's gotten cooked a lot of the times. And that goes for everybody. That's just not AG. Anybody else on a guard, they've gotten cooked up and down the roster. So I don't think it's gotten stale, but I do think that there's some elements of it that have kind of lost its effectiveness. I think
Like
KCP.
what?
I think KCP going Orlando has kind of been a big factor in that as well. I think that playing like a Watson and Brown next to him is kind of tough because you have guys who aren't spacers. I'm curious how many minutes that happened with Russ on the floor with AG too.
It's such a small sample size with him at center, and it's actually quite a number of different lineups that it's hard to really glean anything from slicing it even further. But I'm curious how much more we're going to see it. We saw it a bit against the Lakers,
Right.
actually, on Saturday, and that's when the game got out of hand. Was when those lineups came in the first half. When DJ played at backup, it actually wasn't that bad. I think it was just I think he was like a -4 in that first stint, which is like very manageable, in the grand scheme of things. But obviously the Lakers lead ballooned to 20 points while those AG at center looks were on the floor. So those, haven't been as effective this year. No, we don't really have a big sample of it, even in 2023, because Malone really didn't even go to it before the playoffs that year.
Right.
So our sample size for it on the whole are actually quite small, even if you combined all the years, because it's literally just the playoffs with a shortened rotation even around AG. Like you're talking about, like, okay, well, KCP's out. We have fewer good players taking up the minutes, around him. but
Yep.
obviously you shorten your rotation in the playoffs, so kind of get around that a bit. And then last season, Malone went to it more than he had in the previous regular season, but it really wasn't until like the second half of the year, or it'd be like for very short stints in like the second halves of games. That's definitely something that I will want to monitor, because one of the looks I definitely expect them to go to at some point in the playoffs is Jamal and Russ with AG. And I don't know who the other two players will be around that trio. But if you're going to play Russ without Jokic, Jamal has to be there. And if Jokic isn't there, obviously AG will be if he's playing the backup five. So that's definitely something I'm very curious how Malone's going to manage and try to tinker with in order to find, optimal combinations, because I am worried about the lack of an ability to play like a real double big look. And if like we're talking about like, oh, well, Zeke has looked okay at the four, but the Zeke with AG lineups have been even worse, at least so far. So I'm curious if they just experiment with that more. Will and I have been talking about lineup data all season long, and a lot of things can shift when you just get a bigger sample size, right? So, who knows if this actually holds
Yeah, I think DJ has to play. I don't know about
in
playoff
the
minutes.
playoffs. Well, okay, yeah.
I think in round one, I would go to it and see how he does. But I do think that I've been stressing all year. I think Malone has done a good job of experimenting a lot with his lineups. And I think he's got to keep experimenting and pushing the bounds of the roster. I've been pretty vocal about seeing Peyton Watson at the five as well, even though it's a small look. I think Watson brings qualities to the table that can facilitate and help Murray at guard running pick and rolls, because you look at DJ, right? He has limitations as a short roll player.
Yeah.
He can't finish.
He
Uh,
did have that one lob to P-Watt the one time. But
right.
but there are also a lot of record scratch possessions where he catches the ball in the middle of the floor, for
Yeah.
sure.
Because if Jamal, a lot of the time in the playoffs, I'll guarantee it. We've seen it in the past as well. Jamal gets doubled in pick and rolls with the
Yeah,
bench, and
yeah.
then Jay as your short roll man, right? And he can't operate all three levels of the short roll. He can catch lobs and he can pass, but he can't score out of it as far as from the free throw line and below.
Well, that's another situation where I think it will be advantageous actually to play Russ with Jamal in those non-Jokic minutes as well, to have somebody else who can initiate an attack and attack off the second side if they're if they're doubling Jamal. So yeah, this team continues to be an interesting story, an enigma, a puzzle. I don't envy Michael Malone and the coaching staff, actually, because this is a really, really tough task to try to figure out how to make all of these disparate pieces fit together. The reward is often amazing. Like we said, like we've talked about on the show before, there are so many lineups that have shown themselves to be, at least in the regular season, incredibly potent, that we kind of stumbled across. And like you said, Malone has been experimenting more. And I think he's going to continue to, because he's going to have to, because this team is so kind of kooky.
Yeah, he's got a tough job. He's definitely got a tough job. Aside from the starters, I think that there's a lot of question marks as far as who's going to play in the playoffs. And I think that even extends. I think Russ is also in that mix as well, despite his fans being in my mentions every day. But I think, yeah, he's got a lot of questions, Malone, that he needs to answer as far as the bench is concerned in the playoffs, because last year they only went 6 deep. This year, I don't know, go more than 6 guys. If you can play like a Watson or a Russ, if you can. Julian is obviously a big question mark as well. And I think that's an issue where the Nuggets had lineup versatility in 2023 in the finals, extended from the starters with Bruce. Now that guy as the 6th guy is a question mark. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think with hopefully Watson comes back sooner than later, because I think he actually needs to see.
We need to reintegrate him into the rotation and figure out stuff that works around him as well. That's going to be very interesting, because he's not like, in 2023, I think Jeff Green got injured maybe around the same time. And like you said, Deke was playing well with Vlatko around that time. And then when Jeff re-entered the rotation, he kind of like took those minutes back. But Jeff was also a player that it was easy to, he's just like your 5th guy. He knows how to get out of the way and like just, do whatever. or at least not mess stuff up, right? With Peyton, I think that there has to be more intentionality, and so I'm also hoping that he comes back sooner rather than later because time is ticking. I think there are only like 25 games left in the season. Looking at the number 26 games left. 27. Yeah, so that is definitely, we only have so much time to figure out what works, especially against good teams. And this would be a really good stretch to have Peyton in, not just to help us beat these teams, which would be nice, but also to figure out how to best optimize him to be part of the team's best punch.
Right.
All right. So we talked a lot about backup center. The other position uh with in respect to this roster that really has caused a lot of consternation this whole season in a variety of ways is starting shooting guard and shooting guard in general, which is funny because obviously having KCP just kind of help to forego any conversation of like who's your fifth guy that's going to take up like those fifth most minutes at that spot, particularly shooting guard and taking on those duties, right? And it's been this ongoing dialogue about is Christian going to be good enough to be a starter on a championship caliber team? Should Russ be starting? Should it even be over Christian, or should he be starting over somebody else? Do we need more defense from that position than Julian is providing off the bench? Do we need more offense from that position than potentially Peyton Watson provides off the bench? Should Peyton Watson be considered a shooting guard? Like that particular position has really been the center of like the 90%, I would say, of the conversation around this roster this season. And it's really because KCP gone, left a void, and now we have to figure out how to fill it. Now, how would you assess Malone's choice of in first the fifth starter, particularly when everybody's healthy, because that has happened pretty rarely this season. It's still not true now with Peyton out. And then two, each of the different players I just talked about, Christian, Russ, Julian, and even Peyton, their abilities to take advantage of the opportunities they've been given to be that fifth guy and complement the core, right?
I think. I mean, I've been a Christian Brown advocate for a while, especially dating back to the draft. That was pretty. At,
Yeah.
at the time, I think he's filled in admirably this year. I'm in favor of him being the starter as the fifth guy. I just think what his skill set is and what he brings to the table as far as a slasher, cutter, good rebounder. He's got good size for a two guard. Dynamic athlete as well. I just think that's needed around Murray, Porter, and Jokic. So I think with that fifth slot, I think Malone has done a great job of putting CB in a position to start and play really well. And he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid for it as well at the end of this year. Julian has started a good amount of games as far as when there was a lot of injuries, which was a pretty good experience for him as well. Payne started for AG a lot when he was out earlier in the year. I would like to see Payne play a little bit more two guard in certain variations, not like as a starter, but I would like to see him play a little bit more in that role moving forward as far as like another look you could throw at teams.
Yeah, it feels like Peyton has played. It's interesting with him because, like, offensively, I still don't really know what he is. He's shown flashes of, kind of being able to play the dunker spot a little bit, but, the finishing through contact is dicey. Sometimes being able to create off the bounce, like a 2 or 3, but other times you're like, why are we letting him dribble the ball? Sometimes even playing point a little bit, but then, same conversation about like, stop letting Peyton dribble the ball. And even playing some backup 5 in very limited stints where Malone just wanted to go throw out a just totally different look with Peyton out there, either guarding the center or being the main help defender. So, like with him, I don't even know that the conversation is about like, what position is he actually is that important. It's more about like how good can he be in these different versatile roles. Like can he establish a certain floor doing each of those things, do a little bit of everything? Because that's where he gets to the level of like, okay, your floor is like a poor man's Bruce Brown, particularly on offense, right? Because I think defensively, he's shown himself for most of the season to play at a really high level, playing lots of different roles defensively. There's the knock on the defensive rebounding, which is like, it is what it is. Like, it's not like we have outside of really Yoke, DJ, and PJ, no other high level defensive rebounders on this team. Even guys for their position, which we kind of expected a little bit more of from like Christian, who actually he had a really good rebounding game yesterday against the Pacers. But um, so that's not even like a knock for me. It's more like, okay, can you like guard this position? I think Peyton has shown his an ability to guard basically every position at a high level at times. Sometimes with like the smaller guards, that's like a bigger issue really than the bigger wings. And I think he's done a pretty good job on those guys as well. And been, I've said this on the show like so many times, like his versatility has been key in like every one of my favorite defensive wins this
Right.
season, dating all the way back to he had a really slow start to the season because he was coming back from the injury that he sustained in training camp, right? And I think one of the first like great defensive games we saw from him was that one versus Dallas, where I didn't really notice him throughout most of the games. I wasn't paying attention to who he was guarding, but I guess he wasn't really like getting cooked. Then in the second half of the game, Malone puts him on Kyrie, and he finally shuts Kyrie down, who was having an amazing game. Peyton was kind of the only one who could kind of get around the screens and bother him with the length and all of that stuff. And that was one. Definitely the Spurs games against Wemby. And the second one we ended up winning because Malone played him 22 straight minutes in that game as well. And he's just had really good moments. I mean, the one against OKC where he gets the game-saving block on SGA, in a help position too, right? And he had the great game against the Orlando Magic. So he's shown himself to be able to do a variety of things really well defensively. And the question's really about the offense. So I'm really curious about how we're going to reintegrate him in that way. If he could end up being like basically what Zeke's been on offense, then he can stay on the floor apparently, because Zeke has been able to stay on the floor, playing the four position or like whatever, right? Like who just go guard this guy. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about Russ in particular and how he's taken advantage of his opportunity in that fifth starter role?
So the Russ discussion is interesting. Any, anytime I've tweeted about Russ, I've had a lot of people in my mentions. For whatever reason it is. I think Russ has worked particularly well with Murray and MPJ and Jokic at the 4-5. And I think there's a reason for that because MPJ and Jokic have been such good spacers this year as far as their 3-point percentage on having teams pay as, putting your slower front court players on them. And MPJ has been able to attack closeouts. He's been able to obviously shooting at a great clip this year at 41%. And Jokic is one of the best shooters statistically in the league this year. I think that's really opened up the floor for Russ to be able to operate in the pick and roll with Jokic, or he's been able to operate as a cutter, as a slasher as well. Obviously, his transition game is always still really good. I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing now is I think teams have been game planning for Russ in the Jokic pick and roll lately, ever since the break, I think. Teams are playing the pass. We saw that the other night
for sure
against the in their last game against the Pacers too. Teams are just game planning for the pass because they don't think Russ is going to be able to score at the rim.
Yeah.
When he gets into the paint, which he should. He should honestly start going up for more layups despite even trying to miss because Jokic will get the offensive rebound and put it back up. I've liked Russ in that role at times, and I think it's curious because Malone hasn't gone back to that lineup at all.
Which the one with basically MPJ at the 4, like no AG.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't understand why. That's one of my not a gripe with Malone, but it's something that I question is because like he has these lineups that he finds right when players get injured, and he doesn't go back to them once everybody's back. Like I would like to see Russ at the 2 next to Jamal with MPJ and Jokic at the 4 or 5 at times. I think that'd be another lineup that statistically has done really well. That Strawther point guard lineup in the beginning of the year. I would like to see it again just to see how it fares. You know what I mean? And kind of see that versatility and see how that operates. But
I think that part of like there are a lot of things to juggle with the rotation, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that I think it's been pretty maybe you've noticed it too, but I think pretty obvious since AG has been back in the starting lineup is Malone's been really trying to get him a lot of minutes with Jokic.
Right.
A lot of his minutes are coming with Jokic, and I think they're just trying to reintegrate that chemistry too. So that's part of it. The other one is try like making sure unless it's literal like foul trouble like there was yesterday that in the non-Jokic minutes Jamal is on the floor and so you can't play him like literally all of those. For
Right.
example, let me share a lineup with you and I want you to guess the offensive rating. You got Russ, AG, Christian, MPJ, and Jokic. Got 250 possessions.
Russ, CB, MPJ, AG, Yoke.
That lineup has a 130 offensive rating.
Wow.
So one of the things that does jump out of like all the offensive four factors are in the like 90th plus percentile, like 95th plus percentile, except turnover rate, as you would expect. But they are, 95th percentile EFG and like all the other things. Offensive rebounding is off the charts for that group, as you would expect from it's Russ, who's a great offensive rebounder for a guard, and like everyone else is like huge for their position, right? They're rebounding almost 40% of their makes, or sorry, their misses, but they're also good on the first shot offense because the EFG is so high with this group. And it's not a small sample size. I mean, that's about half of the most played lineup, half as many possessions as the most played lineup. Maybe like Malone has access to this data as well, right? This lineup is sometimes like MPJ's not on the floor for this lineup. It's like Julian is just he's on a struggle bus, right? Right. I think if you took that lineup and made it Julian instead of MPJ, I don't even know if we have played that. That's good. 'Cause often when you sub out MPJ for Julian, things decline precipitously. But it's one of those things where you're like, okay, well, I guess there's enough passing, and yeah, they're turning the ball over a lot, but I guess they're getting back because the defensive rating it's one of our better defensive lineups as well.
Right.
And probably because if I scroll over here on cleaning the glass, they have a really good defensive rebounding rate. Yeah, I get it. There's lots of things that I still want them to try, but there's also only so many things that you can try when you're trying to just like get a coherent rotation in place and not chop up guys' minutes. Like that's another consideration as well. Making sure that guys can play longer than like 5 minute stints at a time for the most part. We're a very rhythm based team. I think it's one of the reasons that we're so bad on 3+ days rest. Like, I think the Nuggets are winning over 70% of their games when it's 0, 1, or 2 days rest, and then less than half when they have more rest than that. That was an interesting, digression on lineup data and how Russ actually fits into lineups with AG. I think we just honestly need more sample size with these things, and some of the stuff shocks me. Like you put Zeke with Jokic and you get a 130 offensive rating. I don't know, man. Like Jokic is the best player in the world. I don't know what else to tell you. If he's able to make some of these things work, but hopefully we can get some stuff that makes sense before the playoffs. All right. Well, if you're still listening to this point, thank you very much. It also means that you like our content a whole lot. So please, if you do, remember to click that like button and also hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified of all of the episodes of our show and don't miss any of our content. Hit the notification bell as well. And always remember that winning is fun and losing absolutely sucks.